And welcome everybody. Happy Hump Day on Wednesday. This is Non Sequitur. I am Kyle Curtis, joined as always by Steve McRae. And tonight we have two very special guests with us. One of the guys I believe that pretty much everybody in the audience at some point or another has seen one of his videos. And if you have not seen the latest video of him in his speech at the Faithless Forum, you have got to go check that out. Not now, but following this stream, go check it out. But thank you guys both for taking the time out to come and join us, Thomas and Craig.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Perfect. Well, I'm just going to go over a couple things that we have coming up, and then we will get it rolling. Tomorrow at 8 o'clock, we have an interesting kind of... They're two people that we've never featured on here before, but they're pretty well known in the underground debate community, I guess. But we have a creation and evolution debate that's going to happen tomorrow at 8 o'clock, and I'm purposely withholding the names until we send out the promo later tonight, and you'll see why when we do that. Tuesday at 6 o'clock. That's April the 24th. At 6 o'clock, we have Matt Dillahunty and Inspiring Philosophy. They will be here discussing the topic, is religion a positive influence in society today? So make sure that you're here, 6 o'clock. We will start very sharp, and that will be great. And I believe right now that's... Saturday, you can check me out on the Heathen Hour podcast. That's Godless Cranium's podcast. So I will be on that on Saturday, 8 o'clock. And now I'll turn it over to Steve, and we'll get this thing rolling.
Hey, everybody. I've actually really been looking forward to this discussion between Holy Kool-Aid and Craig here. It's going to be on, is religion a justifiable thing to have in society? Should we have religion? Is it justifiable in the ways that it's something that is beneficial? Very similar to the discussion that Matt Dillahunty was going to have, however, from Holy Kool-Aid's perspective and from Craig's perspective. So I know most people know who Holy Kool-Aid is, but I'm going to have you introduce yourself anyways, talk a little bit about your positions, and then Craig, and then we'll start off with Thomas here. By the way, welcome back, Thomas.
It's always a pleasure to come back on to talk with you guys. You want me to just dive into my introduction?
Dive out who you are. Just dive right into it, man.
All right. So I am a full-time secular activist, and I started an anti-cult organization called Holy Kool-Aid LLC. Primarily, I do educational videos. I try to keep them laser-focused, entertaining, and animated. And I'm also a podcaster with the Science and Big Idea podcast called The Here and How. And I put that out every week with Rationality Rules and Rachel Oates, two other atheist YouTubers. And as of like a week and a half ago, I'm technically a conference organizer too, because we put together the Faithless Forum, which was the first ever conference organized entirely by atheist YouTubers. So that's primarily what I do, along with a few other things. But
you are a busy individual, to say the least.
Just curious, how did the Faithless Forum go?
It was amazing. It was probably the most cohesive, fun conference. The whole thing went by without any loose ends or anything crazy going wrong, and the turnout was fantastic considering we only had 2 months to put it together, and all of the speakers and everything, like, we just had a blast. We had a lot of audience interactions and engagement, because a lot of conferences are stale, but we wanted to have activities where people join in and have fun and have a good time, and I think we accomplished that.
Excellent.
Yeah, the reviews were overwhelmingly positive. Yeah. I don't think I heard a negative comment from anybody. So I think it was definitely something that people want to check out. And I heard you guys might have another one, like a second Faithless Forum.
Yeah, well, we put together a board, and we're talking about Faithless Forum 2, even potentially doing a bunch of smaller ones, but we really want to kind of get things figured out a little bit smoother before we branch out too big. You know, we want it to be sustainable. So we'll see.
Nice. Awesome.
We'll see where it goes.
All right, and we have Craig Reed. Craig has been on our channel a couple times, but hasn't really engaged too much. This will be the first time he has pretty much a one-on-one with somebody. So Craig, welcome, and why don't you tell us a little about yourself and your position?
Hello. My name is Craig Reed. Some of the people in the audience will know me from Twitter. I'm a committed theist. I've only been doing this relatively short time. I've been doing it for about 2 years. I started a Twitter feed. I kind of got started, I was asked this the last time I was on the show, because I had watched a lot of the popular YouTube atheists, people like Amazing Atheist, Jacqueline Glenn, and I've been watching them for years as a Christian. And I was kind of like, that's compelling. I kind of like the idea of they were entertaining / theological at the same time. So I started a Twitter feed about a year and a half ago, and now I have a little hole in the wall YouTube channel. It's called Christian Response. And basically I just make videos and I debate with people on Twitter, and, started moving into the arena of the live debates and enjoying every minute of it. That's about it.
Awesome.
Well,
So let's kind of get right into this subject. Thomas, on the position of is religion justifiable, kind of give us your position on it and why you believe that religion is probably more negative as opposed to beneficial in society. Because I think that's the position you're kind of coming from, right? That overall is more negatives than
benefits.
If I
understand the topic, we're not talking about is the existence of evolution justifiable through evolution, like why is it here? Because I mean obviously we have religion, we know that there's some justification for why it exists, but as far as whether it should exist from here on out, like as far as whether or not there's better alternatives and whether or not we actually need religion to have a cohesive society, I think that the answer is overwhelmingly no. And before we dive in, I wanted to kind of, play a few caveats. One being that oftentimes when I get into these discussions with theists, they'll throw out straw man positions that are like false equivocations between atheism and authoritarian communism, nihilism, or social Darwinism. And I want to make it very clear that, as an atheist, my atheism really only talks about one thing. That's the existence of God. My atheism doesn't dictate my morality. For that, I have humanistic principles that I turn to. So, I'm not going to argue over, there were regimes that weren't religious that were horrible, because I think that that's not an accurate categorization of what atheism is. But I will lay out an argument for, how we can have a better alternative through humanism, and how we can use that alternative to come to a better world that lacks a lot of the craziness and a lot of the horrific atrocities that are done in the name of religion and dictated by religion. I'm not sure how long you want my intro to be, but I can
go into it.
Yeah, you want to dive right into it, then Craig can respond.
Okay. So first of all, in order to prove that there's no good justification for the existence of religion, really all that I have to do is show that, one, all of the horrific atrocities that are done in the name of religion or that are mandated by religion, first of all, my opponent would have to prove that all of those atrocities are somehow outweighed by all of the good that's done in the name of religion, because there are some horrible things that are done in the name of religion. And if he can show that the good outweighs the bad, then, he's already, starting to make progress. But then he would also have to show that the good that's done by religion can't be done by non-religious organizations, or isn't being done by secular organizations without all of the horrific atrocities that accompany religion. If I can show that there is a better alternative, and that that we no longer need the religion or the religious aspects because we're getting there without the religion, then I think I'll have this hook, line, and sinker.
And let's clarify for the sake of this discussion, when we're talking about religion, are we going to specify religion as a whole, or just the Judeo-Christianity types of religions? Or just any kind of religion?
Yeah.
I'd say let's just keep it to Judeo-Christian, just to make.
Is that okay with you, Thomas?
Can I include in that Islam?
I would think that would be included.
If you want.
I mean, I have some examples from like Jehovah's Witnesses and whatnot, which would call themselves a Christian sect, as well as Mormons.
Fine. You could, if you want to define Christian like Judeo-Christian very loosely for the purposes of debate, that's fine. It's fine.
Okay. All right. Then, kind of my opening statement is that, over the course of the last 50 years, the last 100 years, we've seen a massive growth in technological breakthroughs and advancements. We've seen vaccines that have eliminated smallpox. We've seen Moore's law making computing power more and more powerful, to the point now where we have supercomputers in our pockets that are more powerful than what put man on the moon, just a few decades ago. We've seen a rapid drop in violence rates across the world. We've seen an increase in literacy. We've seen a decrease in infant mortality. We've seen a decrease in total fertility rates and the overall well-being across, if you look at the net gain, it's been increasing. simultaneously, we've been seeing a decline in religiosity. But it always seems like whenever we want to have some type of progress, there's always some type of head-to-head battle that goes on between the religious conservative vanguard and the progressive scientists who are trying to, make some type of change. An excellent example of this is in the early 1900s, in vitro fertilization. Women who wanted to get pregnant and to have kids that weren't able to do so without the help of doctors would turn to IVF. And there was a massive pushback by the Catholic Church that said, no, all of these leftover embryos that are in petri dishes, that's a soul. That's, a sacred sperm that, you can't just toss that away. And it took a long time before that was, normalized, before finally there was this acceptance of that as, well, that's not really morally wrong. But then now you have the same thing that happened, in kind of the early to mid 2000s, where you have people with chronic, horrible, horrific medical conditions, and they are in a race against time between when will this disease get the better of them and when will medicine come up with a cure for said disease. And we had this opportunity to dive into stem cell research, and it got put back almost a decade by legislation that said, oh no, it's back to the same exact argument that, well, that's a soul in a bottle. So you have, opposition to stem cell research, you have opposition to IVF, you have families that will deny their children life-saving medicine. And I'm not just talking about Jehovah's Witnesses who deny blood transfusions. I'm talking about faith-healing homicide, which in Idaho literally just allows it legally for parents to deny their children life-saving medicine if they have a faith exemption. You have a religion called Christian Scientists who believe in prayer over giving medicine to their kids, and many people have suffered and died as a result of it. So I mean, I can go on and on and on. You have the Pope denying the efficacy of condoms and saying that you shouldn't use condoms, and that he opposed it while he was traveling through AIDS-ridden parts of Africa where 22 million people currently had AIDS. Now, I can give examples of contrasting those things with the scientific alternative, but the list goes on. You have gays who have been lobotomized. You have people like Alan Turing, who's a hero in the world of computer science, who underwent chemical castration and wound up committing suicide. You have faith healers who will say that they can cure someone of their disease by praying over them, and you have people that throw out their medication and wind up dying from it months or years later. You have child rape scandals that are covered up because, we put this emphasis on protecting the faith and on, you better not expose this stuff or else people might lose their faith, and that's even worse. So you have to save the faith by covering up the rape scandals. The female genital mutilation community is entirely religious. Slavery was not only mandated by the Bible, but it was justified in both the Old Testament and the New, as well as the Quran. Women are told by the Apostle Paul to be submissive to their husbands and to stay silent in church. Now, fortunately, a lot of these verses and a lot of these passages we no longer accept. And the reason that we no longer accept them is because we've outgrown this ancient barbaric text. We see them no longer as literal because our morality is better than that, because we are more moral than that, because we put a value on human life, we put a value on eliminating suffering. And we see these passages that dictate these horrible, horrific things. And we say, you know what? Gay people deserve to be able to love someone without being thrown off a building, because even in this century, even in this decade, you have pastors like Pat Robertson who will say that hurricanes and tornadoes and all kinds of natural disasters are caused by gay people loving each other or by abortions. And as a result of that, you have gays thrown off of rooftops. You have Islamic clerics that will also say the same thing as Pat Robertson. He's not alone in this. He's not alone just in Christianity. There's also lots of other Christian pastors that say the same thing. You have nightclubs that are shot up. You have abortion clinic bombings. You have teens who are bullied for being a part of the LGBT community, and they're bullied to the point where they feel like there's something wrong with them. They feel judged constantly, and oftentimes they commit suicide. Their suicide rates are astronomical as a result of it. So, I can go on and on and on. You have people with stage 4 bone cancer who, are suffering and they're about to die, but they don't want to go through pain and they just want to be able to die with dignity. And yet you have this opposition against euthanasia where the Catholic Church again says, oh, that's taking God's will into your own hands. I've got more examples and I can get to them more throughout this, but essentially my main statement is that when you have a powerful conservative vanguard that bases its identity around a doctrine that claims that humanity is sinful, fallen, and thinks that things are only getting worse. An ideology that glorifies human suffering as a ticket for greater heavenly reward. Then why on earth would they contribute to human progress when they can sit around for another 2,000 years playing Spot the Return of the Jew God in an apocalyptic wet dream?
Okay, that's a lot of examples. So we're gonna give Craig plenty of time to respond to that, because you did throw out a lot of examples. So let's be fair to Craig. And
before Craig,
yeah, go ahead.
I would like to apologize to Pat Robertson for my cause of the hurricanes.
Damn you, Kyle! Damn you!
I'm too fabulous not to exist. Though.
All right, Craig, go ahead and
if that was true, I would turn gay so that I could get wizard-like powers and rain down vengeance on towns I don't like.
It's very possible for you to. I've seen that happen.
Go ahead, Craig.
Okay, so, well, let's see. Where should I begin? There was a debate. I only caught a little bit of it between. Wasn't actually a debate. It was more like a conversation between Matt Dillahunty and Mr. Jordan Peterson. Now, they got to an interesting section on the debate, and I did a video on this a little while ago, because one of Jordan Peterson's main talking points, one of his main raison d'etre, is he will say that transcendent morality in particular, and religion in general, is essential as a cornerstone and a building block to the entirety of Western civilization. That's one of the arguments he makes time and time again. Now, Mac Dillahunty counters with, just because religion is useful doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And, you know, the atheists in the audience are like, woo! I'm assuming these are the atheists in the audience. They're like, woo! Now, I have never heard Matt Dillahunty on the subject of whether religion itself is a net negative or a net positive. You went through a whole litany of woes, and you I'm assuming because you went through all of them, you know, passionately and committedly, that you're laying them all at the doorstep of religion. Most of the stuff you said, I don't know if you could do that fairly. Some of the stuff, sure. But it seems to me, let's get to the root of the actual argument. Because we're actually debating, we're not debating, are there some toxic or negative aspects of religion? Because if we were, I would agree with you and the debate would end. I'd be like, of course there are. But who's to blame? Is it religion itself? Is it Christianity in particular? In the case of Islam, you can make a good case that is actually fundamental to the teachings of Islam. In the case of Christianity, you can make a case. I would argue that that is a corruption of Christianity. I would argue that you lay if you're analyzing the ills of society and you are laying it at the feet of religion solely, that is inane. It's ludicrous. It's not even necessarily worth debating. The society is made up of human beings. Human nature is corrupt. Human nature is sinful. Human nature banded together produces things that are flawed and by nature destructive. This is an argument made not just by the Bible, but it's made successfully by the Bible. Human beings are flawed instruments. We are not instruments of God's perfection. We argue that there is a perfect God and an imperfect society. We live in an evil, fallen world. The root cause of that evil, fallen world is the sinful nature of human beings. That's the argument in the Bible. I believe that argument is a lot more compelling than religion itself as a destructive force in society. Now, let's go to Jordan Peterson for a second. Part of the reason why he argues time and time again is he's actually, they've asked him, I don't know for a fact if he's a Christian or not, I'm not sure, but he constantly makes a passionate defense of religion. And part of it is because he sees now just how you personally, Mr. What's your name again?
Westbrook. Thomas Westbrook.
Thomas
Mr.
Westbrook, or Holy Kool-Aid.
Just how you easily went into like a whole list of litany of woes, and you lay them at the doorstep of religion. Now that sounds suspicious to me like a form of indoctrination in and of itself. You got your whole little talking points ready to rumble with and say religion done it. I don't think so. Most of the stuff that you said, I wouldn't say necessarily religion done it. I would say corrupt human nature did it. You know, when you ban religion itself is also, how are you defining it? You get Democrats together. Have they now become a religion? Oftentimes they start looking suspiciously like a religion. You get conservatives together. Oftentimes they start looking suspiciously like a religion because human nature starts to take over. They start to become morally corrupt. They start to look for outsiders. That's one of the things that human beings tend to do. That isn't religion per se. That's human nature. Human nature. The positive influence of religion, I mean, it's a good question to be discussed, but it needs to be discussed fairly and it needs to be analyzed thoroughly. And you can't just say, well, all this crap I lay at the doorstep of religion because this crap exists and religion obviously caused it. None of the stuff, some of the stuff you said, maybe. Not all the stuff. For sure, definitely not all the stuff. So overall, is religion a net positive?
Okay,
It depends. Go ahead.
I thought
Cut me off at any time. I don't need to speak fine. I wanted to converse. What's that?
You wanna stop at this point and give Thomas a chance to?
Or he can keep going. I think he was about to make a point.
No, it's fine. Go ahead. I don't need to like go on tirades. We can discuss it. The whole point is I don't think it's a given one way or the other. There's some evidence in favor of the destructiveness of religion. There's evidence in favor of the fact that religion can be toxic. I would argue that that's human nature itself producing the toxic results, and that Christianity in particular is trying to solve that problem in the human being himself, solve the root of the problem, giving you something to live for that is positive, period.
Well, Craig, let me ask you, do you think overall, though, I think the kind of the topic of the discussion is overall, is do you think if religion didn't exist, would society benefit from that more than having religion in society? Like what Thomas was mentioning, he gave many examples, which I think we all agree. And I'm gonna say for arguendo that these are extremes. I'm not going to try to place all religion into these really extreme positions, but he brought some great examples up. This stuff does happen in the name of religion. So if religion didn't exist, would you think there might be a benefit to society overall?
Well, okay, if he already tried to rule out that I can't like refer to Nazism or examples like that. But here's what that taught us. When Nietzsche was talking about God is dead, one of the ways that he meant God is dead is God is dying out as an organizing principle. Religion is dying in Western civilization. And he predicted that wasn't going to yield good results. It was going to yield really bad results. People are still going to band together, and they are still going to band together in groups and look for outsiders. That isn't religion. That's not Christianity that produced that. That's human nature. So if you take away Christianity, which, yes, you'll argue that, the God of the Old Testament is a thug, yada, yada, yada. But at root of Christianity is actually a positive morality that is based on service to others and subjugation of the individual. That produces good in society if properly followed out. Hasn't been. But if you take away religion, human beings being what they are going to form new and more terrible religions. And they're going to exclude you and me from those religions. And they're going to persecute us in the name of, there was a South Park episode about this, where you made everybody secular atheists. And then they start fighting over which type of secular atheists they were. You get rid of religion, and you have the same problem of human nature. And they're going to bond together, and they're going to form religions of, football teams, religions of which presidential candidate, stuff like that. So no, it's a much more complicated question than is religion a net positive. We can analyze religion itself, areas where religion can be toxic and destructive because it's not being practiced correctly, in case of Christianity. But you take away the religious influence on society, you're going to have moral chaos. Moral chaos, and you're going to have new and more terrible religions, and those more terrible religions are going to have no positive light in them at all. That's what I would say.
So I would have to disagree with you on that fairly substantially. In that one, I don't usually use South Park to inform my philosophical opinions, but what we've been seeing, and you can actually look at, and I know that trends don't always follow out, but you can look at the trend of what has been happening over the last few thousand years. And if you've read the book Better Angels of Our Nature, Steven Pinker makes a very incredibly strong case for the fact that humanity and humankind and our tolerance for violence has been declining and declining and declining at an extremely rapid rate. Yes, there are still instances where you'll have, the Darfurs, or you'll have, wars in Syria, or you'll have, genocides here and there. You'll still have, crimes of passion and murder and whatnot. But if you look at what is societally accepted, and you look at things like just in the last 100 years, the Geneva Convention and prohibitions on torture. You look at the International Criminal Court. You look at.
Hold on 1 second, Craig. Let him finish his thought. Okay, he didn't interrupt you. Let him finish.
So you look at this trend, and what we're seeing is that people now not only have this abhorrence to things like, if you go back into the Middle Ages, where everyone was arguably, at least in Western Europe, were predominantly Christian, either Protestant or Catholic, and they were killing each other over it. But you had things like the rack, where they're literally stretched limb to limb. You have people put on a wheel until their bones are crunched. You have impaling. You have burning them alive and immolation at the stake. And these things were seen as normal. They were everyday entertainment that the crowds would gather to watch. And yet nowadays we're absolutely appalled that someone spanked their kid, or that, we hear of some atrocity that's done in a distant land, and it absolutely horrifies us. And I think as a culture, yes, if you're put in isolation and you're raised in a tribal society, and you don't have education, and you don't have culture, and you don't have the last 2,000 years to learn from, which we have the benefit of now, then yeah, evolutionarily, our genes genetically, we're not much different than we were 2,000 years ago. But fortunately, our growth, the mimetic evolution, and the ideas that are shaping and that are forming over the last 100 years and the last few thousand years have brought us to the most peaceful time in human history. You see this with Peter Singer talks about the expanding circle, and how our morality is no longer just tribal, but it's become kind of a cosmopolitan world, and is now extending even to the animal kingdom. So I would have to argue that while, you might hypothetically say that we're going to have, some evil, horrible, even more violent religion, that's just not the direction that things are going. And I don't think that there's any evidence to support it.
Wasn't hypothetical. It happened in Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany was a religion. It looked, smelled, sounded, tasted like a religion. They happened to worship.
Half of them were Catholic. Half of the Wolfen SS were declaring Catholics.
I'm not saying that all Christians who practice Christianity do it with integrity and have brought the light of Christianity and the gospel in a way that's good. I'm not arguing that. And I would tend to agree with you that there has been tons of moral progress between, let's say, year 600 and today. But that moral progress didn't happen in a vacuum. And if you think it did, and if you're arguing it did, you're arguing from a place of ignorance. We know how atheists don't like doing that. That moral vacuum happened in Christian Europe. There was, if it wasn't for the influence of Christianity, the world in 900 AD could have potentially fallen apart. If you ever read how the Irish saved civilization, how they went into the little monasteries and they transcribed book by book, brick by brick, and kept a culture and a light alive, and kept kept moral order. Yes, society has progressed.
Alive from what? Because as I recall, there were entire lists by the Catholic Church of books that were prohibited that went against the dogma. And my second question to you would be, after, you look at from the time of Constantine all the way up until the Renaissance, there was, over 1,000 and a few hundred years in there where they had an opportunity to have moral progress. But it was not until the Renaissance. It was not until the rise of secular ideas and values.
So you're saying that the Renaissance was the moral progress of the world? That's completely and utterly debatable and very, very, very spacious claim.
Well,
and
that's why we're here.
Right, but I would debate that. Let's start with Rousseau. Rousseau. Or would you say that Rousseau is the beginning of the Enlightenment, which leads? Well, I mean, I don't know exactly where you're pinning the ideas that led to the moral progress outside of Christianity. If you start with Rousseau, the argument was that man is innately good. Now, that to me is no brainer. Obviously, not so. And you can see the results of Enlightenment thought in things like the French Revolution, where we start out with the ideals. And those ideals are fine, liberty, equality, fraternity, but we wind up with the guillotine. Why? Because human nature will take over and win out in the end. According to the Bible, human nature left to its own devices is going to win out. You're going to have moral chaos, period, because that's what human beings do.
The guillotine was a violent response to a violent system. It was, you had a bunch of uneducated proletariat or peasants, whatever you want to call them, that were pushing back in the way that they had been treated the way that they knew how. And it
Right.
was around this time. I'm not saying that it happened right on point when the Renaissance happened. All of a sudden, society was peaceful. The things take generations for these
Right, but you're
ideas
giving
to ripple through society.
agree
So
with
you
you.
have like the ideas of Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson,
But Jesus Christ's ideas had no bearing on any of this, is what I'm trying to say. It
Rousseau,
didn't
and
happen
you
in a
have
vacuum.
people even like right now Peter Singer and Steven Pinker. Like these are new people in this day and age, and the ideology is still progressing.
Right, but the moral progress of human beings, we both do agree that society has morally progressed from the ages of, let's say, from 900 to today. That people do things we do today, the things that they practiced back then would be morally objectionable to us today. So there's been moral progress on society as a whole. But you're saying that Christianity had no influence on any of that? I mean, that's mind-boggling. Considering
I
that
never argued that it had no influence. If anything, there's
Well,
a
it had a
positive
huge
influence from the horrific, horrible, violent things that are condoned by the Bible. If anything, you see that and you're like, I want nothing to
Yeah,
do
but
with it.
what about the positive? I mean, that's if you are saying that human beings morally progressed from 900 to today, which we both agree that they have, correct? Yes, we both agree.
You cut out for a moment.
I did. I'm sorry. From 900 to today, we both agree that there's been moral progress in society from ancient times to today. Okay. One of the foundational texts of that society was the Bible. And one of the foundational moral teaching, matter of fact, whether you consider him God or not, very few people would debate that this was the greatest moral philosopher of all time, Jesus Christ. Now, yeah, you can bring us back to, God commanded a flood in the Old Testament, yada, yada, yada. But Christianity is rooted in the teachings of Jesus Christ. And that teaching is moral in nature. And if you're going to say that society has progressed as a whole, you can't rule out the fact that possibly the biggest book of the entire, civilization. This is why Jordan Peterson so passionately defends religion and Christianity, because it's so obviously the cornerstone of that moral progress to some degree or
was
not.
The Bible,
maybe not so obviously, we can debate it.
Was the Bible not the number one book from the time of Christ up until the 1500s? Where was the moral progress then, Craig?
Did the 1500s and the Renaissance appear in a moral vacuum? It was beamed down from outer space from people who hadn't read the Bible or hadn't read Christ?
It was people
right there,
figuring out things as people, as individuals, as societies that are growing and tossing around ideas. It wasn't
one of the tools in
from the Bible. We had 1,500 years where the Bible had a monopoly.
One at a time, guys. One at a time.
Yeah, and just for clarification, Thomas, you're coming from the perspective that there's more of a backlash to the religion and religiosity from the 1500s on, because as you said, there probably wasn't much development between 0 and 1500, because that's all they pretty much had. And I think Craig's coming from the position that the moral things that we have now, the progress we have made, is attributed to religion, but you're more, it's attributed to religion only because of the backlash that
I'm
we
saying
have
it's
to religion.
attributed to religion not only because of the backlash, but also because that when I actually look at the holy books, that and I actually read through the text, and I have read through the Bible and the Quran, and I have read passages that will say that will advocate for genocide of entire men, women, and children. There's an excellent passage, I believe it's Deuteronomy is 20, or I'd have to look, double check, where it talks about literally a guideline for how to rape your sex slaves. Once you kill the men, women, and children, except for the women who've not known a man. It's like, take her home, tear out her fingernails, and let her cry for a month before you go in and rape her. And that is not a moral teaching. That is a dictate from God, but that is not
the only teaching in the Bible, though. That's an atheist constant talking point refrain. It's not even the main point of the Bible. It's not even one of the main. It's not even close.
Okay,
therefore,
Craig, rewrite the Bible.
Reel it in.
Then,
all right, sorry.
Rewrite the Bible.
That's a tiring one. I mean, that makes the conversation.
But it is in there. It needs to be addressed.
It's important.
Okay,
it's important.
But so does the book of Matthew, because it doesn't say that. And Jesus' first teachings, first public utterances, I'd assume, are some of the most important things that have come out of his mouth. And it doesn't say that's how.
If I took a clean glass of water and put 3 drops of piss in it, would you drink it?
That analogy is false.
Give me the Bible without those.
Do you swim in the ocean? The Bible is the ocean. It's not a glass of water with 3 drops of piss in it. It's an ocean with some potentially some toxins in it, which I'm willing to discuss. But I'm not willing to discuss them under the idea that they negate the whole, because that's nonsensical. And that's a constant atheist talking point. There's no point in talking about that because it's innate.
The reason, Craig,
then everything in Rousseau is negated by the 5 or 6 things he said wrong.
No, the reason that atheists bring this up.
Hold on,
No, we can't, because the reason that atheists bring this up is not because we don't think that there are positive things in the Bible. And I've said on my channel many times, I've said that there are positive things that you can take from different holy books, from the Bhagavad Gita and from the Quran and from the Bible. The reason that I bring it up is because Rousseau does not claim to have written the unerring, perfect word of God. And yet the Quran and the Bible do make these claims. They say that this book is perfect, it's
but that's
unerring,
a different
and it's a guide.
That's a different argument than has religion been a positive influence.
We're going to give you plenty of time to respond. Let him finish his thought, though. And then he's not interrupting you.
I'm not trying to bust his ass. I'm trying to be organic.
Let him finish his thought, okay?
The moment that a Christian says the Bible has good stuff and it has bad stuff, but it's just meant to be cherry picked based off of today's morality. Well, okay, then it's like, who's the arbiter for what's moral and what's not? It's the person doing the cherry picking, and why not just go directly to the person and throw out the Bible? Why not just go directly to society that seems to have figured out what's good and what's not, and be able to tell without the Bible which passages are good and which aren't? Yeah, there's nuggets of truth and wisdom.
The society that you learned your moral lessons from was heavily influenced by this evil book that only talks about genocide and slavery. It doesn't. And
I never said it only does.
I know.
I made that concession.
I'm not trying to be harsh with you in the slightest. You're totally fair with where you're going with this. I'm just, I'm trying to trash the point.
Your passion.
Yes, thank you. I'm really not.
And use it wisely. Just let him get through a thought, because it does nobody any good. You can't get your point across if everybody's talking over each other. So,
by the way, this is kind of a side note, but last time you were on Non Sequitur, you called Christopher Hitchens the worst atheist of them all. So in honor of him, I'm drinking a Johnny Walker Black, which was his go-to.
Good man.
Was it really? I didn't know that. Wow.
I just have regular coffee, but if I could have something for Hitch, I would. Have a sip for me for the Hitch.
Do you want to retract that statement, by the way?
Which statement?
That Christopher Hitchens was the worst.
Oh, I don't care. I was just making.
I don't think I meant it in any.
My hero. I mean that's heartbreaking.
I'm a fan of the Hitch too.
I doubt I was trashing him. I don't usually do that. He was pretty fun and charming in terms of personality. He's the most entertaining, one of the most intelligent. I don't know the context that I meant it, but yeah, I'll retract it if it's ruffling your feathers. I don't want to ruffle your feathers there. We can retract it.
Although he is my hero. We do need we need some more Hitches around, but okay. So let's get back.
I thought I was your hero.
So Craig, I was wondering. I know I've been putting you on the defensive just a little bit here, and I've been dropping some bombs that obviously are going to trigger some emotional response. But I'll try to kind of pull back just a little bit from that and ask some more objective questions. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay. So if let's say, for example, that you have 2 charities and one of them is religious and one of them is not. And I'm not going to say which one. It could be the religious one. It could be the non-religious one. But let's say that one of them is doing some amazing, excellent work. And then they also have some bad stuff that they're doing behind the scenes or condoning, or there's some harm that's coming from it. And then the other one is exactly the same, but without that. Would you not argue that you should go with the one that minimizes the harm and the damage and maximizes the positive?
Yes, but you have to see harm and damage realistically and objectively. You can't just say, well, because it's religion, therefore harm and damage.
Okay,
and
fair enough.
Wait. Before you go on, I just wanted to get back to the one thing you said before we move on, because it's relatively important. My objection to what you were saying in total is that you are tending not to notice that you say there are good moral teachings in the Bible, and there are some parts of the Bible that you like and you're all for and you're behind. And I'm assuming some of those are the teachings of Jesus Christ. You tend not to notice that the Bible was heavily influential on the society that you're saying has morally progressed through these centuries. You're acting like only Rousseau influenced it, and it wasn't. Rousseau was minuscule compared to the totality of the influence of the Bible, and that's more than, Noah's, the story of Noah's Ark. The reason why I get upset with the atheist talking point is not because it's upsetting. I'm not passionate about it in terms of that, because it just totally distorts. Every atheist knows. Let's take the stone the witch on a Sunday. Don't stone the witch on a Sunday. Which church in America are people trying to stone the witch on the Sunday? None. So obviously there's been some reasonable sanity approach to, yes, there are challenging scriptures in the Old Testament, but to pretend that they now negate the entirety of the Bible, and you're saying that you yourself said society has progressed morally. Well, big influence on that society was Christianity. So you have to give it some credit, period. I don't know how much you want to give it, but you got to give it some, because that was a huge influence.
Okay, go ahead. Let's say for the sake of progressing the argument that I lend you an olive branch, and got it. Does that mean I won? No, I'm going to place your feet to the fire here in just a moment. But let's say I lend you an olive branch, and I say, there has been moral progress, and that the Bible had some positive influences. I don't think that makes it true. I don't think that makes it right. But you have yet to prove, in order to win your point, you have yet to prove that society now needs religion, and that it is a net positive. Even if it helped us to overcome the horrific things in the Bible, even if some of the positive things in the Bible, we help to use them to overcome some of the negative things in the Bible or the Quran or any other holy book. Now here we are at a point where you still have people who are using verses from the Bible to condone to back up the actions that they're committing that are horrific. And I would argue, and I've been arguing from the beginning of this. I would argue, and I've been making this case from the very beginning. You would have to show how, in order to prove that religion is justifiable today, that we should have it, you would have to prove that we need it right now to have a cohesive, functioning, positive society, and that the net positive outweighs the net loss. Okay, let's give Craig. Actually, I agree with you on that, Craig. What would you give examples for to say overall religion is more beneficial to society than not? What would be? I mean, obviously Thomas threw out a bunch of examples.
The entire moral underpinning of society as a whole, the entire foundation, the idea that we have laws that we need to obey, that those laws supersede the individual, that we live in a society of laws. That's one. The entire structure, its foundations, the stone that the builder refused would be the head cornerstone. It is the cornerstone of everything you hold sacred, near and dear to your heart. Once you start saying that, it was yes, there is toxic elements. I'm totally with you on that.
Yeah, are you implying that you couldn't have a secular society with no religion? It would not be stable. It would not be functional. Would not be moral.
It's possible. I'm not ready to go that far, but that's entirely possible. That hasn't been tried.
But isn't that the argument that Thomas is making?
At the very least, religion is superfluous.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting out of it. If there's no difference in society, whether you have religious or not, I'm not seeing how you're making your argument, Craig, that religion is more beneficial than less beneficial. At best, you're saying it's superfluous.
At best, you're saying it's what got us here. But you have yet to make a case that it's
First of all, we both agreed that it may have been absolutely essential to what got us here before, to this present state. Now, the idea that you're putting out there is that it has become, even though it got us to where we are, it has now become completely superfluous to the moral functioning of society as a whole. That would be true if human nature were any good. If human nature were perfectible or good. The two of the most, let's say, the smartest philosophers in terms of let's have an atheist world, George Bernard Shaw and Nietzsche. Both of them recognize the problem that you need a perfect man in order to. Nietzsche wrestled with the problem constantly. God is dead. We no longer adhere to the morals of Christianity. In order to have a society now that functions perfectly, we need perfect human beings. George Bernard Shaw found a solution in the perfectibility of man. Said that human beings were going to become, perfect themselves morally. Now,
do you think that
was before World War I? That was before World War I, and that was before Auschwitz. That's nonsensical. Then it probably made sense. Then I probably would have said he's probably right. That's really forward thinking. Now, to me, it seems naive and inane And so obviously not so. Just like the idea that science can perfect human beings. That was laid to rest in World War I. Laid to rest even worse by Auschwitz. Nazi scientists were the equal of American scientists. They were every bit as good, but they were morally reprobate. There is something morally bad, morally flawed in the character of the human being. Left to its own devices, we will destroy all that we hold near and dear. That's the argument of the Bible. I'm saying that is the God's honest truth. Period. Period. That's what I say.
It also stemmed from, and again, I hate to get back because I feel like we're opening up Godwin's can of worms here. But
sure,
I still,
that sounds fun. That sounds good.
I don't think that is relevant to what we have today, because, you know, I've been arguing not for a case of social Darwinism, not for a case of ethnic cleansing. You know, I could argue all day long. I could argue that there was a massive Catholic influence on the Nazis, and that, you know, not only did they have God with us on their belt, not only did the Pope did not excommunicate a single member of the Nazi party except for Joseph Goebbels for marrying a Protestant. You know, this is, you look all throughout, you know, Mein Kampf, and Hitler talks about, you know, his fealty to Almighty God. You see it, you know, written all throughout the Nazi party, is this idea that, like, they were somehow superior, that it was almost divine inspiration. It was their duty and their right to God. Now, I think that you'd be hard pressed to call it an atheist movement. If you had presented Stalin or Mao as atheistic regimes, I would have granted you that Stalin and Mao were atheists and that their governments were atheistic, but still, it was not rooted in humanism. It was not rooted in modern Enlightenment values, and it wasn't democratic in any way, shape, or form. It was authoritarian. It was dogmatic. These are the principles that I see in religion that I fight against.
Craig, I totally get that.
Craig, hold on 1 second, Craig. I know you're getting excited and you want to jump in there to kind of, you know, even when you're agreeing with it, but people can't understand what he's trying to say if, you know, you're talking over him. So let him finish out a thought. He will give you the time that you need to respond, and he's been really good about not stepping over you. So just kind of give him that same courtesy. We can still have a passionate discussion without it getting to where people on the outside can't hear either one of your points. So just kind of rein it.
Well, I thought he made the point. That's why I was ready to.
Well, when he's done, he'll send it over to you. And then
I'll try not to hog. I'll try not to hog the conversation, but.
So, Craig.
I don't think you are. I didn't think you were, but I thought you were done with that. Anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
So I had a couple of comparisons that I wanted to make. You know, I was talking about comparing a secular charity organization versus a religious alternative. And
but see, he just went to a different subject. That's why I wanted to get what he just said before he moved to this.
I apologize. I thought you had responded to it.
That's a good point.
No, because you went somewhere totally different than what I was saying, and that's why I wanted to agree with you with what you said. Yeah, Nazis weren't secular humanists. That's not the point I was trying to make. Wasn't trying to make that, you know, that was an atheist regime and that's what happens. What I was trying to make, what it illustrates, is the argument of the Bible is that there is something in human nature that is in need of deliverance, that is irredeemably flawed. You look at what happened with the Nazis, and that was one of the leading scientific, in terms of material progress, in terms of scientists. It was as Western of a country. It was England's brother. Before Adolf Hitler, World War I, you go back to World War I, it was very indistinguishable from England. It was a little bit further down in terms of, they still had a monarchy, but they would have had a constitution.
Still religious.
And still, so was England in those days.
Yeah, so I don't see what your point is. You seem to be showing that. Okay,
human nature.
You seem to be coming to the false conclusion that Nazism is it's the inevitable end game of humanism, or that it's the inevitable end game of humanity. And yet, what we've seen is the exact opposite.
No, it's a potential of humanity, and you are giving the check power, the power of checking the impulses, the violent and destructive and terrible impulses of human nature. You're giving none of a check power to religion, the influence of religion itself. Now, I would argue that it's completely God, sovereign hand. But even if you don't believe in God, you still have to see religion itself as a bulwark against the chaos of human nature itself. That's the only thing.
But Craig, I'm not arguing that. Yes,
we can go to the next. I just had to get that in there.
Craig,
we don't have to.
Okay,
we don't have.
Craig.
We can go to his next question.
Nazi Germany. Yes, that was one possible direction that humanity could have taken. And you say, you claim that religion is a bulwark against this kind of violence. And yet in the name of religion, you have other end games like the Inquisition that are insane. And the levels of atrocities committed. Can you hear me now?
Are you connected now?
I don't know. Go.
Yeah, your Skype is a little.
You answered, so I'm.
Yeah, go ahead, Thomas. Your Skype is just a little bit breaking up, but you're fine now.
You were talking about how Nazism is this possible end game of humanity because of human nature, as if it's some inevitable end game, but it was religious. And at the same time, like, you're failing to acknowledge that, you say that religion is a bulwark against it, but you have things like the Inquisition that was inherently religious, and no one can argue that it wasn't, and that it was put forth, and it was horrific. The amount of torture and the atrocities committed to defend the faith and to protect, people from straying from God, was entirely religious. So, like, you have these possible directions that you can go, but you have yet to prove that we need religion today, that there aren't possible alternatives that are non-religious that are better. And I could put forth the Scandinavian countries. I could put forth Iceland. I could put forth the UK. I could put forth Japan. These are all modern countries with very low violence rates that have very, very high standards of living, that have that are very democratic, that practice the rule of law, that are some of the least religious on earth. And I could juxtapose that next to the most religious countries, places like Somalia and Nigeria and Saudi Arabia, not just Muslim countries. Nigeria in the South especially is predominantly Christian. And yet they're places that if you had to choose anyone at random from that list, I guarantee you'd probably choose the secular ones.
They were not produced in a vacuum. Those secular Norway and places like that did not come out of a 700-year tradition of secular enlightenment and atheist teachings. Give them 200 years with atheism, and then you'll see the real fruit. I mean, that's way too early in terms of social history to even have them as representative samples. If you're just talking purely empirical, irrelevant, because they came out of Christendom, all of them. They were part of the West. They were raised.
Not Japan, not Hong Kong.
Japan,
not Singapore,
when we dropped the
not
bomb
Thailand.
on Nagasaki, then Japan imitated us and became a really quick study in all things Americana.
Wait,
so
no. You can't say that Japan adopted Christian values after Nagasaki.
I didn't say they adopted Christian, but they adopted,
what about South Korea? Is another excellent example.
Okay, okay. I'm not trying to draw a sweeping conclusion. What I'm telling you is you can't. I'm not arguing that my sweeping conclusion, I have now proved, case closed, that religion is all good and awesome. But to pick like Norway because they're secular now, that's neither here nor there. That's like me saying, look, this Christian guy down the street is great. Religion is awesome. So what? That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying case closed. Religion is good. I won. I'm saying those cherry picked. Remember that word? Cherry picked little examples.
No, they're not cherry picked. These are the list of the most religious and the least religious. It's not cherry picked.
So what? Those least religious didn't appear in a vacuum produced by 800 years of secular atheism.
But as they became less religious, they became more peaceful.
According to you.
No, according to like you read Better Angels of Our Nature, he lays out an extremely powerful case where he shows all of the data and all of the points, and you can go to the UN has collected massive data sets over the last 50 years, and you can look at things like infant mortality rates and violent crime rates and
those
GDP
last
per
50
capita.
years are just the tail end of a civilization. The civilization that produced them is
I don't have to mute you, buddy, but we can't have a fruitful conversation if everybody's jumping over each other. You know what I'm saying? I know that you're passionate. We're going to give you as much time as you need to respond to everything that he's saying. Just let him finish his thought so that he doesn't forget anything and can get it out and people can understand where he's going. And then I promise you will get just as much time, if not more people, or whatever you need to explain your position. But while we're at the stopping point, let me see if I can understand what both of you are trying to say. Craig, you're saying that they arrived at these or this data now that they are more peaceful and more progressive without religion, but because they had religion at some point, that influenced their development into this now peaceful.
The examples he cited were like Norway. That's
okay.
Came out of Christendom. It didn't come out of history of atheism.
Sure. I just want to make sure that I'm getting your side. What he's saying, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas, but he's saying that, and I don't think it's a good argument on your behalf, Craig, and here's why. Because they're out of that religion now, and now the data is saying that they are more peaceful without that. Ultimately, it doesn't matter if they had it or they didn't. They're at a point now where it's not there, and it's better than it was when it was there.
Yeah.
So he's saying that they're evolving out of those kind of commandments or laws that are put forth in the Bible, and the result of that is that their society as a whole is better. So that obviously means that when you take religion out of that society, and it would be a thing if it just happened in one society, but it's happening in multiple. So that's kind of his I think.
Well,
Thomas,
and I think,
but it's
my argument.
Okay, go ahead.
My argument too is that, there was, over 1,500 years where the church had a monopoly on, on morality. Am I cutting out?
No, you're fine. But real quick,
No.
I want Craig to kind of talk about this a little bit, because I think Kyle made a wonderful point, and I don't want to get glossed over.
If I finish
Sure,
that sentence?
Sure, go ahead.
The church had a monopoly on morality for 1,500 years, and we didn't see this rapid moral progress that you would expect to see if it was a result of Christianity and religion. But then as soon as you start having this shift away, there's a very rapid progress, a very rapid moral progress, and it's not just in religious countries. It's in places like Japan, and like I mentioned Thailand is Buddhist, but it's atheists. Most of them are atheists, and you see these same type of trends that are happening there as well. And so my argument is that you don't need religion, and it kind of is a little dishonest to say that it's because of Christianity that's happening.
Yeah, Craig, it seems like your argument, and I think Kyle really nailed it, is that you're arguing effectively that the benefit of religion is to convert people to atheism, because these atheistic societies now have come out of religion, and they are flourishing. They are doing better. Let's be realistic here. Most of our technological advances and increases in our knowledge has because of a more secular type society, steering away from religion, focusing on the sciences, like Nietzsche was saying. Secularism is encroaching in society, and the God is dead approach. I'm not sure how that effectively gives you an argument that because we have more secularization now and more atheist countries, that is a benefit for having religion. I'm not quite seeing you make the argument there.
Connect the dots, Greg.
Yeah, connect the dots there.
He connected himself. He said 1,500 years these countries were Christian for 1,500 years. But in the last 50, they're really peaceful, lovely places, as if the 1,500 years prior had no influence on their development.
Now, I think you're missing the point, Craig.
What he's saying is they had that monopoly and they didn't do anything with it. It took them.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is they did not produce the ideas that you take for granted as production. There's no way I could possibly prove this in the gist of a conversation. This is just intuitive and instinctual. But the ideas that you take for granted as a secularist, and to some degree you hold sacred, were produced in societies that were profoundly Christian and profoundly influenced by Christianity. And that coincidence is not without importance. You kind of say, we're done with religion because all it produced was junk, but look at how great Norway is, as if Norway produced itself in a vacuum instead of at the tail end of Christian Europe. And Japan is a special, I'm not prepared at all to talk about, what was the Buddhist country you named? I don't know. But Japan imitated us. Japan imitated us. I don't know how deep their I'm not even sure if what are they, Shinto there, mostly? I'm not entirely sure, but We took them out in World War II, and then they tried to adopt, to the best of their ability, a Western consumer-driven society, and they kind of did it really well and started out producing us. They took from us. They took from this tradition that was born out of European Western civilization. The reason why Jordan Peterson defends it so passionately is that it's foundational to the things that you hold near and dear, the things that you think. You didn't.
Craig,
you weren't produced in a vacuum. You were produced in a culture. That culture has roots. Those roots are important, and the Bible is a huge chunk of those roots. Just because you don't want to recognize it doesn't mean it isn't so.
I hate to pull, Craig. I hate to pull rank with degrees and stuff, but like I do not care about intuition. You talked about how it's intuitive. I care about data points. And I did study international studies and political science in college, and I have charted out and mapped out countries and based on religiosity and violence rates. And when you chart out 200 plus countries and you see a very strong correlation towards the rise of secularism and democracy and peacefulness and better overall quality of life. And, I'm not saying that correlation equals causation. But if it required religiosity and if it required Christianity and in order for you to have a functioning, society that's not raping and killing and plundering everyone in sight, you would at least expect the correlation to be going in the opposite direction.
No, not necessarily, because you don't know. No, not necessarily. That's a really good thing to throw out there. And it doesn't matter what you study. Versus my intuition. My intuition is based on a knowledge of the world that we both live in. And the things that I said are rooted in the reality of the world that we both inhabit. So you can study whatever you want.
Craig,
the things that I pulled out of my intuition are based on the reality of the world we live in.
Craig,
1,500 years, you said it yourself, of Christianity. And now you're acting like that had no influence on the beautiful society of Norway, which was produced in 1,500 years of Christianity, but it doesn't influence the beautiful society of Norway now. Why? Because they studied atheism from 800 on? No, they were Christian up until about 50 years ago. So your causality, saying that causality, you are drawing really, really spacious conclusions in your empiricism from very limited data. 1,500 years you said they were Christian. Now 50 years they're heaven on earth because they're so secular. That's nonsensical.
Craig, I really want to clarify this. Are you actually trying to make an argument that your personal intuition is a better argument than Thomas's actual data points?
My personal intuition is based on the reality of the world we live in. I made that crystal clear, and you know the reality of the world we live in out of his own mouth. 1,500.
But he's using actual data points. And correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas. In your experience, if you took all the countries and you'd made a measurement, and we all agree correlation isn't causation, but it doesn't mean causation. But if you looked at these countries individually, would you say there's a trend that the more secular ones tend to do better than the ones with higher religiosity?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, and what he's saying, Craig, is that that's a provable point by data. It's not.
You're going to have.
Right,
you're going to have a couple of outliers.
That those societies.
Craig.
You're going to have a couple of outliers. One particular outlier is the United States, which is still overwhelmingly religious, but oftentimes it's in spite of religion, not because of it. You see religious institutions fighting against, and oftentimes using resources to fight against religions that religious organizations that are denying climate change, denying evolution, denying the efficacy of vaccines and whatnot. And I'm not saying that the vaccine thing is a religious argument. It's usually not, but it's in spite of religion, not because of it.
No, Greg.
Okay, again, you guys didn't seem to hear me. He said 1,500 years of Christianity, 50 years of hallelujah, we have Norway. That empirically, it doesn't matter what the data points said. You had 1,500 years of Christianity. Apparently, that had absolutely zero influence on the culture of Norway.
Nobody's argued that, Craig.
I can't believe this is the.
That's more or less what he is arguing.
That's not what he's arguing at all.
Can I clarify?
Yes, please.
Okay. So a point of clarification, when you're looking at data sets like this over a long span of time, what you have to do is, you see, oftentimes, you can't say that correlation equals causation, but you do have to look at when things happened, when things occurred. So if you have like 1500 years of Christianity, and that entire time period, they had generation after generation after generation where you could have had moral progress, you could have had change, but what did you have instead? You had people that were killing each other, that were burning each other at the stake, that were engaging in all kinds of torture, and it was horrific. And then you have a renaissance, and you have a rise of secularism, and you have a rise of humanistic principles, and these ideas of, you know, people all across from like economics with like Adam Smith, and this idea that it's not a zero-sum economic game, and you can actually have competitive advantage and comparative advantage and trade back and forth with other countries and grow and progress together. You have, you know, it's not happening in a bubble, but you have these secular ideas rise out of nowhere. I'm not saying that they're atheistic, but they're not religious. And it's as a result of this mindset shift that has nothing to do with religion. You see that happen, and then after that happens, you start seeing all these countries adopting them, and they become more and more and more peaceful. And that's the trend that the data is pointing in. So I'm not just pulling this out of my ass.
Okay, but what I'm trying to tell you is you have zero idea, none, which ideas are religious and foundational and were put in the culture by Christianity and which weren't. Let's just take one sentence from the Bible. One, I lay before you this day blessings and curses, now choose life. So just one sentence from the Bible.
Craig, let me ask you this, Craig. Let me see if I can put this in an analogy and see if we can go out of this route. Let's say that I am a horse trainer. Right, or there's a guy that is a horse trainer at a farm, and he wants to run this horse in the Kentucky Derby. All right,
right.
But for a month, he has this horse. He beats it, mistreats it. You know, some days he'll be good to it, but for the most part he's not. So he runs in the Kentucky Derby and he loses. Right, now you have somebody come in that treats the horse rather nicely, lets it, you know, do its thing and feeds it like it's supposed to, treats it really nice. He runs the Kentucky Derby, he wins. Was there a point in having would you say that the first person that was, you know, had that horse had anything to do with him winning that Kentucky Derby? Or was it the fact that the second guy came in and treated the horse like it's supposed to?
But that's not an analogy of what transpired. That's not even close. That's just a great straw man, but it's not an analogy of what we're talking.
It's pretty close.
It's a brilliant straw man.
Explain to me how it's not.
Okay, let's take one example from actual history. Sure. Let's take Martin Luther King Jr. Now, I'm sure that we all agree that what he achieved in the civil rights movement was profoundly important for the nation of the United States of America. You tell me which parts of what he did were influenced by the book of John and the Gospel of John. Huge chunks of it. You're trying to tell me that this is what I'm telling you, that we can move on. We can honestly move on. But what I'm trying to tell you is you're saying that these societies are now really, really, really great societies, and that had absolutely zero to do with the Christian societies that produced them and that they came out of Christianity. Now let's take Martin Luther King Jr. And I'm sure you all agree that what he did was absolutely, was right, yeah. True, good, and necessary for the United States of America. And you know, on some level that he was influenced profoundly by the Gospel of John and the teachings of Jesus Christ. How much was he influenced? Who can tell? But it was extraordinarily important that he had Christianity as his North Star when he was trying to accomplish what he accomplished.
Could he have been Martin Luther King without it, though? That's the question.
Don't know, but that's what he's saying. He's saying absolutely he could. But he's saying absolutely could have. I know it because I've read books. Nonsense.
But there's a lot of. Craig, there's a lot of great leaders.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Can I take this idea and have a slight segue with it where, if we can distance ourselves a little bit from the emotion, because I realize that so I'm an atheist, and I have a lot of times people will attack me on the front of you can't be good without God. And, so there is some emotional level for me personally where, I do get kind of defensive when people, make this claim. And I'm assuming for you as well, there's some emotion here of, you feel like we're attacking something personal to you, something that you believe. So do you mind if I bring up an example from Islam?
Well, no, because it's Christianity that I'm talking about. No.
Okay, but the debate as a whole was about religion, and I think if I can make the comparison, I can bring it back to Christianity. It's a broad point.
Same way.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so would you say that for Islam, there are a lot of atrocities that are done in the name of Islam. There's, aside from suicide bombings and female genital mutilation, and there's also the widespread cover up of child rape scandals, just like within the Catholic Church. And there, you have women who are reduced to eye slits, and even when they are protesting it, like is going on in Iran right now. But aside from that, there's also a lot of positive that's done in the name of Islam. I think it's the number 4 philanthropist, Azim.
Okay, I don't know.
The number 4 philanthropist who's donated billions of dollars. His name's Azim Prenji, and he's a Muslim IT. He says, the verses, in the Quran, they'll point to, just like in the Bible, you have like Mark 10:21 says, go sell all that you have and give to the poor and you'll have treasure in heaven. So people are like, the Bible condones charity. Well, in the Quran, there's Quran 2:72 says, any charity you give is for your own good. Any charity that you give shall be for the sake of God, and any charity you give will be repaid to you. So they're like, it's condoning charity as well. Now, I know this is a bit of a long-winded point, but when the media approached Azim and they asked him, about his charity work and whatnot, and about his, him being a Muslim living in a predominantly Hindu society where Muslims are often denigrated, he said, we've always seen ourselves as Indian. We've never seen ourselves as Hindu or Muslim or Christian or Buddhist. So my question is, how is that religious? How is that not his humanism that is acting? How is that not something that you can have without religion? Like, that is a very humanistic principle that he's putting forth. And so I would argue, just as, you can get rid of all of the violence in the Quran, you can say it's not the divine word of God, you can get rid of all of the abhorrent things that are interpreted literally and used to justify horrific acts, just as you can do that in Islam and preserve the positive teachings and without the religion. Objectively, as a secular person, you can objectively, take out the positive things and have a moral, positive society. You can do the same with Christianity. And that's the point I want to make.
Okay, I hear the point you're making. I'm not sure if it's true. Now, yes, there is such a thing as a good person who isn't. I can send you links
for that story.
That's fine. I can send. There's such a thing as a good person who isn't religious. That they have a moral compass and they do good things. And, in the name of something, they're just a decent human being. That exists. The Bible even talks about that, What I was talking about, and I thought my point kind of brought it home. When, for example, in the example of Martin Luther King, foundational to what he accomplished, foundational to nonviolence, was actually the teachings of Jesus Christ in the Gospel of John. Now, Kyle asked me, how much of that is that all because of, how much of that can you actually ascribe to Christianity? I don't know. Could he have done it without Christianity? I don't know is my only answer. Yours seems to be, yes, absolutely, case closed. I'm not so sure. That's all I'm saying. I'm not so sure. And I don't think that, giving me an example of people who do good things who aren't Christian, I don't think that all people who aren't Christian are bad human beings. Many of them are perfectly decent, lovely human beings.
But Craig,
I would argue that that's God's influence on their heart. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
But I think that Thomas is actually just saying, look, everybody agrees that people can do things for various reasons, some of which people say, right. I read the Bible this way, and I'm going to do good things. But I think Thomas is basically saying, overall, that's not needed. I mean, I do good things because I'm just a moral human being. I have ethics, and I don't do things that I think are unethical. I don't need the Bible to tell me those things. And I think he's kind of going from the approach, maybe Martin Luther King would have been the same, whether he had that guiding principle by the Bible or not, because you can also use the same counterpoints that Thomas had brought up initially, that the Bible is full of kind of unethical, unmoral things. Let's be realistic. There's genocide, there's murder, there's rape. I mean, God's morality is such that Lot's wife looked back and she got turned to salt, but his two daughters that committed, rape to their father, there's fine. So there's kind of a questionable morality when it comes to the Bible, yet the atheist would say, look, I don't need any of that to be moral. And I think you even said earlier that you don't necessarily need to have a religious belief to be a moral individual, correct?
Can I make a point on top of that? A point on top of that is, had America still been following the dictates of the Bible verbatim, and still had slaves and had slavery, then Martin Luther King would have never had a platform.
Exactly. That's a good point.
Well,
It's not a good
Greg,
point.
I think we should move on from this point because,
Okay, go ahead.
a minute ago, ultimately we don't know. It's a moot point because none of us can go back and see, how it would be.
Right. I thought we're just trying to debate.
Oh, I can
it, so-
demonstrate that last point just based off of a verbatim reading of the script. Sure.
I'm talking about his example of Martin Luther King.
Fair enough.
Well, yeah, but I think we agree that he would have been heretical if it would have been under the same type of dogma that they were back then.
So let's try to steer back to things that we don't have to guess at.
Okay, can I make two comparisons real quick? The first one is there is a man. His name is Machai Viravaidya, and his nickname is Mr. Condom. And in Thailand, the birth rate used to be 7.7 children per woman. And to anyone who's studied demographics, when you have birth rates that high, there's almost inevitably there's poverty that's accompanied by it, because women just cannot, and families cannot sustain taking care of that many children. But when you have fewer children, you can invest in their education and their future and whatnot. And so as a result of this guy pushed for family planning, for condom use. In the early 1990s, the AIDS rate in Thailand was through the roof, but through distributing condoms and making it normal and normalized, he pushed back to the point where the AIDS crisis fell by 90% and 7.7 million lives were saved. Now, this guy, he's an atheist, and he's in a country that's predominantly atheistic. It doesn't believe in God. Saved 7.7 million lives. You contrast that with Pope Benedict XVI, who in Africa, he said while visiting sub-Saharan Africa, where 22 million people were infected with AIDS, he said, and I quote, that the AIDS problem cannot be overcome through the distribution of condoms, which even aggravates the problem. The reason he said this, it was purely scriptural, purely from his interpretation of the scriptures. If, on the other hand, you were to replace the Pope with, let's say that exact same quote came from the head of the World Health Organization, you would instantly have not millions of Catholics just taking it point blank. You would have millions of scientists in revolt. The guy would lose his job overnight. People would be in an uproar and no one would accept it. That is where I think that religion is damaging, and where you can have secular alternatives that are better for society, and that progress begins where that insanity leaves off.
Craig?
I thought we were shifting. Are we going to a different
that
thing?
that was a shifting.
That was a shift.
I mean,
how do you respond?
I mean, he's making a good comparison here between two different fundamental ways of dealing with a crisis. One of which is a practical application by promotion of condoms and focusing on single unit families rather than having 10 kids you can't feed, and poverty and disease that goes along with it, as opposed to the Pope who comes in, or the bishop. Was it bishop? Was it Pope?
It was Pope Benedict.
Pope Benedict the 16th.
So Pope Benedict came in and basically said, "No, look at my religious viewpoints supersedes all this. It does lead to more disease, more poverty, and things of that nature."
How do you answer that?
Oh God.
I know.
No, it's just that these type of this is a straw man argument. I mean,
no, it's
I'm not sure why this is a straw man argument. I think this actually goes to the core of
because there is such a thing as a human being who does things that are terrible or wrong or maybe not correct in the name of God. That's kind of irrelevant to the discussion. Do you want me to say, here's an atheist who did this thing under the banner of atheism, I who shot the church? Now, see, atheism to blame. I mean, it's not.
That's not the point he's making.
Religious institutions, is it not because religious institutions are dictating rules and doing it from the guise of divine authority, and people are accepting it because of that? That's the problem.
Yeah, he's not talking about individual people per se. He's talking about religion as a whole. This is somebody who represents the religion as a whole.
Motivation.
Right. A religious institution is a group of human beings. And that's what I started off with. Human beings are subjected to the same corrupt human nature as other human beings in other institutions.
Those are the people that practice. That's the entire point of the conversation. What he's doing is he's showing you how people that practice atheism can produce
are
a better
really, really good. That's just not so. I mean, people who practice atheism, yes, some of them could be really good,
Craig,
and some of them could be
it's
complete
I know
vile
that you
villains.
can't.
But here's the difference.
The point is that he's showing you where there are examples of atheists that are producing, using their lack of belief, a better society. And you're arguing that you want to argue for Christianity as it is without people in it is a good thing to be. And that's not possible because you have to have people that actually practice.
No, I'm not. The original discussion was, is it a net positive or net negative? Now, I'm willing to cede some of the points where it produces negative or toxic results. But the only bone of contention I'm taking with him is he doesn't seem willing to say, for the sake of this discussion, he said it in other videos, but he won't say for the sake of this discussion that it produces positive resuls.
Because
then
would
we
be
could have a
positive
real conversation. Now we've got some
I've said
did terrible things in the name of religion. Big deal. Do you want me to find
I think he has said there has been some positive things.
The topic is are there justifications for it? And
Yeah.
he doesn't have to concede that there are positives.
But
you have to try to prove that there are. He's disproving.
But he has. I mean,
topic.
correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas. You agree there are some things that come out of religion. I've heard you speak on this before, especially when it comes to aesthetics and music and culture and a lot of other things. But you also agree, though, every positive thing that comes out of religion could probably be attributed to a secular society as well.
Yeah, you can do it just as well, if not better, without the religion.
And so that's his argument.
To really push this point, you mentioned at the very beginning of this talk, Craig, how you talked about how there are religions that can do horrible things, but you can also, if you replace them, you're just going to have another religion rise up. And you pointed to different organizations that, and I forget the examples that you gave, that I would not necessarily call religious. And the reason I want to stress this is because I think in order for it to be a religion, you have to have some form of a deity, although Buddhists might argue against that, but you have to have some type of shared creed, some type of faith in
shared
belief
creed
in something.
Is the only thing that shared creed, I would say.
You'd have to have faith, faith in something and some type of community that adheres to that and that joins together in order to do that. And in most cases, there's some form of worship. There's some form of giving something up, either time or sacrificing money or something for the cause. And I think that if God, one, there's no evidence for him whatsoever that I know of. I could be wrong on that, and I'm willing to stay humble on it, but I've yet to see anything that's demonstrable. And as far as faith and creeds and mantras and chants and stuff, I'm like, no, I think that we should stay curious and question everything. Doubt is not a virtue. Taking things on faith without evidence is not a virtue. I think that we should explore and examine and see how this world works, because we can know how the universe works. And if we come together on using scientific skepticism and critical thinking and democracy and this idea that in the free marketplace of ideas, good ideas rise to the top and bad ones sink down in the free marketplace of ideas. And if we push that type of thing, that is not religious in nature. Oftentimes religions push against that, and they try to tell you not to doubt, not to ask questions, and not to be curious. And I'm like, if we can get rid of the dogma and get rid of the creeds and still have community, that's not a religion. That's just humans coming together on something positive. And I think that we can have that. And that's you'd be hard pressed to prove that simple community and simple shared values is what all it takes for it to be a religion. I have yet to see a single definition that would argue that.
Can I speak?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I go?
Yeah. Oh, you.
I'm totally for shared values and communities. That's not what when I was trying to define religion broadly, I was using mundane examples to try and stress the point. That's why I said Democratic Party, Republican Party. I was trying to say it could be just any group of people who get together. Now, I'm not saying they're religions per se. Let's just take the difference between like a spiritual person and a religious person. When we start talking about religion, that means something very different. I mean, we're defining it differently for this conversation, but in that particular example, okay, I knew punk rockers who were religious in that sense. They adhered to a strict dress code. If you didn't wear black white laces on your Doc Martens, you weren't actually in the club. And they had orthodoxies like religious communities, but they're exactly the opposite of what you would say a religion is. That's all I was trying to say. When people band together and they form groups, human nature is such that they tend to all start to do the same thing. They tend to adopt creeds, they tend to adopt dogmas, they tend to find outsiders. And I used mundane examples to try and stress the point that that is endemic to human nature. It has nothing to do with religion or Christianity at all. It has to do with human beings. And that's what they do when left to their own devices, they will do that. Yeah, I'm totally with you on having communities and communities of shared values. The only value I was trying to point out is that some of the values that you hold near and dear were a product of the 1,500 years of religious indoctrination that you said, let's just throw out with the bathwater, had no influence on anything whatsoever. That's the only thing I was trying to say, is that just like with Martin Luther King, you can't say how much of his, nonviolence was essential to what he accomplished in the civil rights movement.
Which was largely a product of the news coverage, and he was influenced heavily by Gandhi, who was not Christian. Who was
also influenced by the Book of John. He was
influenced by Jainism.
Yeah, but he was also influenced by the Book of John. Gandhi's nonviolence also came out of the Gospel of John. He talks about that.
It stems primarily from Jainism, which the primary tenet of Jainism is strict nonviolence.
My understanding is that he was heavily influenced by the Book of John himself, Mahatma Gandhi, and that his nonviolence was rooted in the same thing. Yes, Dr. King was influenced by Gandhi.
And I'm not saying that there weren't Christian influences on culture. I'm not saying that people didn't read verses or that there weren't aspects of it. But what I am saying is that you cannot say that you have to that religion itself right now in our current world and our current state of events is justifiable, because you can do better without it. You can do so much better without it. Get rid of the dogma, get rid of the faith, get rid of the creeds. Unite on secular humanism and around making this world a better place, not around living for the afterlife and some apocalypse that Jesus is going to come back soon. The people who are making progress, they're people like Elon Musk, who's an atheist, Bill Gates, who's the number one philanthropist in the world, who's an atheist, Warren Buffett, who's also doesn't believe in God at all, and he's the number two philanthropist in the world. People who Tim Berners-Lee, who made the internet or came up with the internet, is an atheist. Richard Branson, like all these people that are contributing to progress and the technological revolution, and making our world better and less poor, and fighting diseases, and donating to the elimination of or eradication of malaria and whatnot. Like, these are all things that are happening, that are being done by atheists without religion. And I think that the less we invest in these ancient backwards institutions, and the more that we can focus on society and humanity and create a positive, better world, I think the better off we'll be.
Okay, real quick. I know, Thomas, you have to go here soon. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you guys a last word, so to speak, kind of summarize your points. I think this was absolutely fascinating. Again, thank you both for coming on. This was amazing.
Can we get one question in before that we kind of have them sum up? Because there was a great question earlier by someone. I really kind of want to ask it.
Yeah, well, we can do one.
I've got till about 9:45.
Right.
I also would want to hear his question that he had a question for me that we skipped over at one point, but we can wait.
I think I might have gotten back to it.
Did you? I don't remember it.
I was comparing the Catholic Church's approach to condoms versus Mr. Condom.
Oh, it was the Pope Benedict thing? I thought you had another one.
So.
Never mind.
Well,
if so, I forgot.
Somebody had asked, and this is a good question to Craig here. Could Craig clarify which bits of the Bible are to be ignored for moral reasons? And I think that's a good question, is which parts of the Bible should we say, okay, this is morally good, this is not morally good, and by what standard do we objectively look at it and go, okay, this is parts of the Bible that we find to be immoral or reprehensible, and this is parts of the Bible that we accept?
The Bible is supposed to be taken seriously. It is supposed to be taken as all Scripture is divinely inspired, so you are supposed to prayerfully consider all of it. Now, if you want to find things that are going to resonate with, what is true and right and good, start with love your neighbor as yourself. Start with the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Go through the entire book of Matthew. You'll find 4 or 5 controversial scriptures, and it's pretty obvious. That's why I wasn't trying to bust his chops, because overall I thought this was a great conversation.
You'd be hard pressed to bust my chops.
Okay. No, but I mean, I wasn't trying to be.
It takes at least 10 inches.
Well,
that was a crude joke.
Is chops a word for penis? Is that what that?
No,
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It could be.
All right, never mind. Went over my head.
Well, I'm not sure that answers the question, though, Craig. I understand what you're saying, but I'm not.
The question is, I don't. The question doesn't sit well with me. Like, I don't think that he should have to be put on the spot to go through the Bible.
Well, no. That's not the point of the question.
Slavery and all that stuff.
No, I don't think that's the point of the question, though.
What Thomas brought up, I think, is the same thing, because he's going to say the exact same thing that Thomas brought up in his opening statement. I mean, Thomas listed nearly every single one that could be.
Right, and that's why I think it's a legit question. I mean, what do we go by?
But it's pretty obvious when you actually go to the Bible and read it, which teachings are. If I could pick out, let's say, the 60 or 70 scriptures that would be inerrant, and you guys would all go, yeah, I'm for that. That's good.
Why are there errant scriptures in there to begin with? I mean, shouldn't
I don't know. That's for another time.
That's a whole other debate. So
that's a whole.
It's a fair question, though.
Your clothing.
Yeah, it's a fair question, but we're trying to wrap. That's another 2 hour. Another 2 hour thing with me interrupting.
We'll say that for next time you're on, Craig.
Is there going to be next time? Good. Cool. Okay.
Is there going to be a next? I love that. Is it going to be a next time?
Start with,
it'll be a next time.
I wasn't sure there was going to be a next time, but
no, right. It's definitely.
Thomas will close out, and then
you guys cut out.
We're going to let you close out your argument, and then go to Craig, and then that will be it for tonight.
Awesome. So I'd like to open my closing statement with Hitchens' challenge, where he said, name me one thing, one action that is done in the name of religion, a moral action, a good action, that cannot be done just as well or equally well by a secular organization. You would be hard pressed to find one. But name me one morally reprehensible thing that is done in the name of religion that cannot or is not done in the name of secularism. And you would be very, very, in just a moment, you can instantly think of numerous things that come to mind. When you look at secular organizations, one notable example is the lending charity Kiva. It was founded by atheists, and essentially what Kiva does is they'll lend out these microloans to starting entrepreneurs and people in impoverished countries to give them a start. Anyone can go on and lend, and you don't get interest back, and about 5% of the time you lose your money. So when they examined which groups gave the most, the number one most generous group of all was the atheists, agnostics, skeptics, freethinkers, and secular humanists and non-religious, despite them being only a small subset of the population. So even though we represent a very small percentage of the world, they still manage to be the most generous. You look at the top philanthropists in the world, people like Bill Gates and Richard Branson and Warren Buffett. These are people who are not religious. Even George Soros is a non-practicing Jew. That means a non-religious Jew, cultural Jew. You look at countries all throughout the world, and there's this assumption that you need religion in order to have morality, in order to be good, in order to be generous, in order to do all these good deeds. And yet a lot of people don't realize just how secular the world is becoming. For example, The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, after being translated into Arabic, was downloaded 20 million times in the Muslim world. When polled anonymously, people in Saudi Arabia, 20% of them identified as convinced atheists or non-religious. 20% when done anonymously, when they're not fearing death for apostasy. That same statistic, you look at other places like Iceland. Okay. In Iceland, the people, less than half of the people under 25 identified as Christian. But even those who identified as Christian, when they asked them, how did the universe come about? 95% said the Big Bang, and they didn't find a single respondent that said that God did it. So religion is on the decline. Religion is decreasing. This is happening all around the world. The fastest growing group of, as far as religious affiliation or non-affiliation goes in the United States and in the Western world, is those who have who practice non-belief, who are non-practicing, who are non-religious or atheist. And I think that it's a good thing that we're seeing a subsequent correlation with nonviolence, with a rise of peacefulness, with collaboration, where all of the borders around us are starting to crumble. We're having an increasingly cosmopolitan world where we work together to make the world a better place. And when you're not living for an afterlife, when you're living for this life, then you have every incentive to make this world more peaceful, to make this world better. You're not just, this isn't just a practice run. This is the real deal. We have to make it count. When the last comparison that I want to give is a Catholic hospital in Ireland refused a Hindu woman who was she had a complication in her pregnancy, and she was rushed to the hospital. She was denied an abortion even though the child was dying. Because she was denied an abortion, there was an infection and she died. This woman was literally died because the doctor told her that this is a Catholic country, and he abstained from performing the operation on religious grounds. You compare that to Doctors Without Borders, a secular organization that on their website, in plain, for everyone to see, it says that Doctors Without Borders provides assistance to populations in distress, to victims of natural or man-made disasters, and to victims of armed conflict. They do so irrespective of race, religion, creed, or political conviction. We need more organizations like that. We need more secular organizations. And I think that as we see a rise of secularism, we'll see groups popping up. Like right now, we have secular fellowships that are popping up, like Sunday Assembly and Oasis and stuff all over the place, that are coming together, uniting around humanistic principles and putting together charities. You've got Foundation Beyond Belief, you've got UNICEF, you've got UNESCO, you've got Doctors Without Borders, you have the list goes on. And sometimes when you have charities that spring up to fight for things like gay rights, it's doing so because they're fighting against the religious insanity that makes them necessary in the first place. As soon as we can get rid of the backwards religion that's pushing our society back and keeping us in the Stone Ages, then we'll see humanity start to focus on the things that matter, on progress and making the world better, making a brighter future for tomorrow for us and for our children. Thank you.
Craig?
When we started out, I talked about a conversation between Matt Dillahunty and Jordan Peterson. And one of the reasons why Jordan Peterson, although it's not clear whether he is in fact Christian or not, has taken up his cross, so to speak, in defense of the tradition of religion, even the Old Testament. You can click on his links and watch him analyze the moral traditions in the Old Testament, despite, all the, it's only a terrible thug God who commands genocides and yada, yada, yada. There's even moral underpinnings of the Old Testament, the very foundation of what this person refers to as secular human, the very foundation of his entire value system. You do away with Christianity, and you have done away with the essential building block of civilization as we know it. All you know here, all you hold near and dear. And all I was trying to say is that it is impossible, even with studies and research, to discern. And he asked for one example where something can be done without religion. And I brought up one example in this debate. I said Martin Luther King Jr. preached nonviolence in a situation where violence would have been explosive and would have led to race riots, healed a nation. And I argued that he was inspired by the Gospel of John. Now, he countered with, no, he wasn't. He was inspired by Mahatma Gandhi, who was inspired by Jainism. Interesting little point. That is also a religion, Jainism. That is not secular atheism. It is also a religion. It is impossible, if you are really, truly being honest and you're really truly to find the truth. Now, I wanted to get at a conversation that was about truth. And I am willing to, in good faith, say, yeah, religion sometimes sucks, and sometimes it's toxic, and sometimes it's poisonous. But it is impossible to figure out which parts of religion in general, which parts of Christianity in particular are foundational to the essence of who we are as a people and as a civilization. You start removing the building blocks and the whole edifice may collapse. Now, that is part of what Nietzsche was arguing. God is dead. God is dead as an organizing principle of civilization. God no longer, there's no longer a Christian flag to us to rally around. But he didn't say it as like, hooray, we're all going to live in Norway. He said, watch out, people, because the 20th century is going to be science run amok. Atheists love to say that science is, a moral savior. Science is a tool. And in the hand of an immoral person, science is a tool for immorality. In the hands of a destructive person, science is a tool for destruction. World War I bears that out. The fundamental argument, the philosophical underpinnings, the fundamental argument of the Bible itself is that human nature itself is the problem. The corruption that is endemic in you, and there's only one way to conquer it, and it's to kill it off in yourself, is to give your life to Jesus and live a life in service of God. That is the only way to kill it in yourself. Now, he points to a couple of examples of people who are good people. That's fine. Those exist. Bible even talks about people who are good people outside of Christian teachings. And it says it's proof positive that the morality taught in the Bible is actual morality. Leaving aside the typical atheist, let's all go back to God, stone the witch on a Sunday and God commanding the genocide. Every single church in America knows what the foundational teachings of Christianity are, and so does every atheist who argues as the Bible is an immoral book. That's why I get tired of the arguments, because there's nobody in any church in the United States saying we should really stone witches on Sunday because the Bible says it in this page. Now, we can have a conversation about the Bible being inerrant. That's a totally different conversation than what we had. The question on the table was, is religion a net positive or a net negative for society? Now, I was trying to approach it honestly. I honestly don't know. But it's impossible. It's impossible to discern which part you pull out of, especially when we were talking about this point I was trying to make with Norway, the great secular paradise of Norway, where everything is great and there's no problems. That Norway was produced from a culture that was thoroughly Christian for 1,500 years. And it's impossible to discern what books are still being influenced by Jesus' thought and teaching. It's impossible to pick that out. And if you do, the idea that all of a sudden human nature is going to produce some moral paradise, that seems to be naive, spacious, and inane. Look at the history of the 20th century with your eyes open. The idea that human nature is innately corrupt and heads towards the bad, the heart is desperately wicked. That's what the Bible said, and that's the God's honest truth. Look at the history of the 20th century. If the collapse of religion was destined to produce, moral beauty and this great awakening of secularism, it would have already happened. I was a secular person. I was raised 150% in secular left-wing America. I went to church on Christmas and Easter. If Christianity weren't true, I wouldn't be here. I would be with you. Christianity survived because it is foundational to the essence of our society, because it's God's honest truth. God is real, and God is really active in this world. That's why it survives. If you atheists were right, atheism would have won out in 1904. In America, in Europe, it's winning out in Europe, sort of, but the story hasn't ended yet. So I guess that's all I have to say on the subject for now. But this was a fun debate, Yeah. I wasn't quite. This was good.
Hey, Craig. To be fair to you, I did come out of the gate.
You came out swinging. Yeah, I wasn't expecting it.
I don't think you were expecting it, because on Non Sequitur, the hosts are generally very polite, and
although with that rumor gets started, we're actually nice people.
I tend to be more subtle on my channel, but when I'm going debate, I'm not necessarily doing this to be friendly. I'm doing it to make a point. So
no, I got that. When it started, I just was expecting a totally different. I expected it to be more like the last time, where I'm sitting in, we're having a chat, and all of a sudden, my opponent here. I'm like, your opponent? What the? Your opponent?
Well, hey,
hello,
so
what's going on?
Again, I think it was like.
It's still fun. I enjoyed it.
Craig, Great.
they reached out to me asking, do you want to come on the Non Sequitur show? And then like I think like a day before I was reading through and it said like you versus Craig or something, and like I was like, wait, I'm debating someone, and they probably mentioned it, but my like notification feed gets so swamped. We
like to make it more discussions than debates. Debates are usually more structured, a little more formal. We can have those as well, but these are not designed to be
this
debate
felt more like a
structure.
debate. To me,
exactly why we do this. Tonight was exactly why we do this, because I think that we had a really, really, really constructive dialogue, and when you're not, sort of bound by a rigid debate structure, and you can kind of you're flexible with how your format is, it allows for both sides, I think, to get their point across
Exactly.
A little bit better.
Yeah.
So, yeah. We appreciate you both.
All right.
Hey, Craig,
can I ask a question?
You did a good job, and I do appreciate you showing up.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'd love to do it again.
And I realize I didn't pull any punches, and you weren't expecting that. So perhaps round two, you'll kind of expect it.
Yeah,
no one expects the Holy Kool-Aid.
the Holy Kool-Aid. And I heard it on your
nice.
channel
I'm
too,
not.
and I thought it was more like.
Yeah, we're a lot nicer than he is sometimes. I'll give him that.
That's because we have to have returning guests.
Good point.
Is your animation? Is the animation on your channel based on Dan Close? Do you know who that is?
I don't, but no.
Okay. Just wasn't sure because you look kind of like him in. There's a character 8-Ball. There's a comic 8-Ball Comics, and I thought that's what you were basing your animation on, but I guess not.
Well, we're gonna wrap this up. I do want to note that a lot of people were asking me for an after show even before the show even started. They're like, "What time's the after show?" I'm like, "Guys, you have a show first, then you have the after show. That's generally how it's supposed to work."
In the after show?
So, well, you guys are invited both to the after
Talking
show if
Dead?
you wish. It's more of it's like the Talking Dead thing for like the Living Dead or the Walking Dead. Similar to that, we just kind of do a recap. We all get in there and kind of give our own impression what's going on, which obviously we can't do during your discussion too much. We can ask questions, but we all have our own positions and kind of suss things out a little bit more. So you guys are both welcome to join
I thought Stephanie was going to be on the show.
No, not tonight. She's
Is it
she's going to be
immediately afterwards, or
it's
is
gonna
there a quick intermission?
10 to 15 minutes usually.
Okay.
And that'll be on my channel, Steve McRae
shoot
channel,
the
not
link.
this one. But if
It
Stephanie
sounds
wants to
like
join, she's more than welcome to.
duck
But she
out
does have
and-
she needs to sleep, she
Go ahead.
says. What's that, Kyle?
I was just telling Thomas if he needed to duck out.
Yeah, we like I said, it'll be 15 minutes or so you got plenty of time, and then you can
I just
join
need to make
anytime.
a quick phone call. I don't know how long it'll be though.
Right.
Sure.
But we do want to thank everybody that watched this. I had like 175 peak concurrent, which is awesome for
Good discussion.
for this kind of
But yeah,
discussion.
Good.
Yeah.
I had fun.
Thank you.
I appreciate.
Yeah, it was
I
fun. It
appreciate
was
you showing up for
definitely
this, Craig.
intense. Yeah, it was cool. We'll do it again.
All right.
If you want, we'll do it again.
Bring your boxing gloves.
Yeah, round 2.
Word.
Yeah.
Word.
Next time, Thomas, Craig's gonna come out fighting. So there you go.
Ooh.
So be prepared. So that let's call this to a
10
close.
inches, right, Craig?
He's gonna bring his 10 inches.
Bring your 10 inches next time.
Yeah, but I'll whip out my big 10-inch. That's Aerosmith.
Okay. This is going south.
Speaking about non sequitur.
Yes, this is the epitome of non sequitur. That's the non sequitur show. We'll see you in about 15 minutes
Our name.
for the after show, and we appreciate you guys watching. Good night.
See you tomorrow.